You're listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. For more information, find us on Instagram at Decidedly Podcast.
Do people ever refer to you as a decision-making expert?
Me?
Yeah.
Always.
This just happened to me the other day. We were in a big group of friends and somebody sort of turned to me and they said, "Oh, you're the decision-making expert. What do you think about this?"
Yeah, like, you go, "Oh, geez, that's a lofty title.
That's a big title to put on somebody." And so I thought what I would start doing just to give myself an out is like if somebody's asking me for a recommendation on a stock, I'll just go through and say, "Well, here's what I think, and this is let's buy it. When it gets to this price and yada yada, we're going to put this much money in this investment," and then at the end, just go, "But I don't know."
But that's just me, man.
That's just me. Just absolve myself of any sort of.
But I don't know, man.
But who knows?
Yeah, that's funny.
But what if your doctor did that? Yeah, I think you ought to have this surgery. But I don't know.
Well, here's the thing: people want advice, right? And so when you go to your doctor, you would be really irritated if your doctor said, "I mean, you got a couple options here." What do you mean? I got it? What? Tell me which one.
Oh, I got that advice early on in my career. There was a manager who said, "Oh, you always want to give, people who hire, give your clients, 3 choices to choose from."
Hell no.
And I was like, "No, that sounds
no,
horrible. That's not what people want."
Because here's the thing: if you give them one choice, you actually give them 2 because they got to decide
do it
or don't.
Right?
Yeah. No. Don't give them 3. That's way too many. People don't want that many decisions. People want like a true advisor's role and a true expert's role is to help someone limit the amount of decisions that they have to make.
Yes.
And make those decisions more smooth, the decision-making process smoother. Not necessarily quicker, but smoother. Less uncertainty, right? So if you're a grief expert, people go, even though you might not be a grief expert in the like one-on-one advice role, people are going, "Well, I'm going to read this book on grief and I can learn a little bit more about making smoother decisions and hopefully I'll learn some things to not do," right? If you're a realtor, well, you're helping people look at a bunch of houses. Hopefully you better be knocking houses off the list. Don't just send them 50 and help them sift through it. The amount of people that I've fired, like companies that I had hired to do a job and then fired because they were making decisions more difficult for me, is probably 90% of why every company that I've ever fired is because they made decisions harder.
Yeah.
I hired a marketing company and they would always send me pictures like, "Which ones do you like?" I don't know, man.
Well, I think a lot of companies get sucked into that feeling like they have to give, 31 flavors and, and most people don't want that. They just want a couple, give me a couple choices and tell me what you recommend also. You ever go to a restaurant and you ask the server, "Hey, what's this?" Or, what do y'all do well here? Or what's your,
they don't know
and they don't know, or they say it's all good. That's telling you none of it's good.
It's all bad.
None of it's good.
It's all maybe average.
Right.
For the past almost year, I don't think that I've read a menu. I'll go to the restaurant and I go, "This guy's going to know. This chick who's serving me, she's going to know." And I'll ask a couple questions, but generally speaking, I go, "What's your favorite thing?" Uh-huh. And if they go, "Oh, it's the fajitas,"
I don't eat here.
I go, if they go, "It's the fajitas," I go, boom, done, easy. You're telling me that's a favorite. You've tried more than me. I'm getting it. And you're right. If they make that harder for me by either, "Oh, well, I just started,"
it's all good,
or it's all good. Ugh, that's the worst. But I'm not looking at the menu. I'm saying, what's your favorite thing? Now, if they don't look like how I want to look,
oh yeah,
then I take that into account, right?
If they're saying, "Well, I love the captain's platter because it's got a little bit of everything on it,"
I might say,
not.
So, what's your favorite thing when it's snack time?
If you wanted to eat healthy, what would you?
What would you do? Yeah, that's what I'll. So last night I was having dinner somewhere in Dallas. I'm like,
all right,
there's too many things on the menu. Hey man, what's your favorite? And I was feeling like a dirty meal.
Okay. And a cheat meal, so to speak.
A cheat meal.
Yeah.
And my waiter, he looked like he,
that he knew what a cheat meal would look like.
With what I was after.
Was he doing nothing? I
said, "What's your favorite thing, man?" And he brought me this like fried chicken, French fry, mashed potato plate, and it was pretty sweet. So that's what people want. People want, when they're going through transition, when they're making decisions, they want to have fewer options. And one of the areas of life where that's really difficult is in the grieving process. So today, our guest, Amber Jeffrey, is an expert in, maybe in the same way that we're decision-making experts, right. An expert on accident, an expert in grief.
She did fall into that. Yeah.
She's the host of the podcast and online community, The Grief Gang, which specializes in grief one conversation at a time by sharing her own experiences of loss, as well as the stories of others on her show and online platforms. She's gone on to deliver talks and panel discussions at the University of Cambridge and Westminster, and is now working closely with Oxford University to train psychologists on how to support bereaved clients in their clinical work. She's on a mission to get people comfortable with talking about death, dying, and grief, which is what we spent the hour talking about today. We talked about making decisions when emotions run high immediately after death, feeling stuck in your grief like it will never leave, the difference and decision between moving on versus moving forward from death, and befriending your grief, recognizing that it'll never leave, and how to live a life with that grief that will be lifelong. We covered a lot. I don't have a personal experience with grief, certainly not in the way that Amber does, but I still learned a lot, and I felt like we connected. She had a lot of decision-making wisdom to share. So whether or not you've experienced grief recently, ever or never, there is something for you in this conversation. I'm Sanger Smith with my dad, Sean Smith. This is Decidedly. Hey, Amber.
Hello.
Hello, Amber. How are you?
I've got to apologize. Well. You're the first British person that I've had any interaction with since the USA-England game.
Oh, don't
in the World
bother.
Cup.
Don't.
1-1, it's called soccer, baby! God bless America.
Oh, here you go.
Here you go.
Oh my God. As if, do you know, I could just leave this call right now. I'll leave it right now.
She's going to bail on us right out of the gate.
You know what? I don't normally care for football, but I've been loving the social media, and it's like, to give it to America, you think, we can believe and we can win it. And it's like, where's your strategy, guys? Right
now we're undefeated. So
yeah, all right. We'll see how long it lasts.
We'll see how it goes.
Oh, so I'm gonna get the wrath of your high from Friday.
Yeah, thank you. I was riding that. As soon as the game started, I was watching with my sister and her husband, and we stood up in unison and sang the national anthem.
Jeez.
Really
before the game or after?
Before the game.
Before the game. Okay.
Before the game.
I saw a video the other day. This guy had his girlfriend over for dinner with the family, Thanksgiving, for the first time she had eaten, and they decided they were gonna prank her, and they all stood up and did the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, like it was just
like it was and then just sat down and never talked about it. It was great.
Yeah, that's a weird thing. I don't know if what y'all have in England, but every day we make school children around this country stand up and pledge allegiance to the flag.
Every day to the flag.
Very every morning.
Every morning.
Oh no, none of that. Yeah, depends where. Depends what school, but no, trying to get any of these British kids to do anything by hook or by crook, you'd we're a bit of a rowdy bunch over here.
So Amber, tell me a little bit about how you got into doing work around grief.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So my podcast, it's called The Grief Gang Podcast. And it all started, and even for where it's gone today, just all totally on a whim. None of this was ever in the plan, and I suppose that's sometimes the best things in life. But it all to go right back to the beginning of my story, we're going back to 2016 in the June, and I was 19 at the time. And my mother, who was 51, had suddenly been admitted into hospital with a heart attack and to cardiac arrest. And it was the most chaotic 24 hours of our life. She was brought into the hospital very unstable, and within 24 hours inclined, got better, and then declined, and it was up and down. And then the next morning she sadly died to another heart attack. And from that point on, it was me and my brother who's 7 years older than me, just catapulted into this world of grief and navigating a world without a mother. And it was, 19, you're kind of at an age where you think, well, you're trying to navigate what you want to do in life and where you want to go, and, very coming of age. And not only experiencing that, but then now losing a really integral person in my life, I was like, what the fuck am I going to do now? And so just plotted through the next 3 years of my life, just trying to navigate friendships, relationships, career, just everyday life without a mother. And I very much suppressed my grief, and I was amongst my peer groups very much like an alien. Didn't really have anybody else in my life who had experienced a really significant and immediate bereavement to them. So I really felt like one of one in my everyday life. And it came to the summer of 2019 when my mental health took a really bad turn. And it was quite a scary place for me because I like to have a laugh. I like to brush things off very, just that dark humor, British culture. And kind of this summer, I realized something's not right, and I really didn't feel well mentally. And so I decided to go down, I feel like what we are conditioned to do, to go down the therapy route and kind of the counselling route, as kind of when you don't feel well in your mind, you go to counselling and a therapist. And where's that always funny? I saw something before, it said, New Yorkers, if anyone's in New York of listening, the people they count as important in their life is their friends, their family, and their therapists. And it's like, so, but here in the UK, it's kind of a different attitude, I feel anyway. And I felt a really weird thing about actually going to therapy. And I felt that it was quite a weak thing to do. Obviously, do not believe that now, but at the time, I was then 22 at the time, just turned 22. So I went down the journey of trying to find a therapist and a counsellor, and I was paired with one online. I really did want to have face-to-face. I'm quite a face-to-face person, and I couldn't, and it was just, was by hook, by crook, it wasn't happening. So I turned online to find an online therapist, and I was paired up. And long story short, it was very cold interaction. It wasn't what I needed, and I felt like I just took 10 steps back. But I felt a little bit stronger in the fact of that I knew I could ask for help and it was out there, but that wasn't the kind of help that I was needing then and there. And so about a month later, I really just started wanting to find other people, mostly in my age group, but just anybody who understood what was going on in my head and my heart. And I wish there was so much more, like a more strategic version as to how the podcast started. But it was honestly just me and my partner. We were on holiday in Morocco with a bad case of like food poisoning, sat round the sunbeds, and I was listening to these other like grief podcasts, and I kind of like found this world of grief podcasting, and I was listening and I was like absorbing it all, and I was like, holy shit, there's a whole community out here. But I was just like, there's just something's not hitting for me, like something's not speaking to me. And just like that, I just turned to my partner and I said, fuck it, I'll do it. I'll start the podcast. And he was like, what? And it was all in a matter of about 2 days. His holiday was quick and it was sweet and we were gone. And by the time we'd flown out of London and got back to London, I had this whole idea of like, I'm going to start a podcast. And so we hit the ground running back in the UK. And I just thought, what am I going to call it? And I thought, well, I'll call it the Grief Gang, because it's a gang that nobody wants to be a part of. When somebody dies in your life, you just sadly become part of this gang. You might not like anybody in it or the factor in it, but you're part of it now. And so I just created a couple of social media accounts and Instagram and just started sharing my story from A to Z, and just started unearthing all of the thoughts and the feelings I had had for the past 3 years. And for me, that was like my therapy, just speaking into the abyss, into this very mic. I've not changed my mic in 3 years, and just telling my story. And little by little, people started tuning in, and they were like, I really resonate with what you're saying, or you're not alone in that. And became obsessed with it, meeting people from across the UK and then across the world, interviewing them, sharing their stories, because I quickly learned that not only me sharing my story was really important, but sharing other people from other walks of life and losses as well was really integral too. Because grief is so nuanced and it's so layered. And though I have lost a mother, I can learn so much from somebody who has lost a child or a sibling or a partner. We all have very different experiences in it, but how we cope is sometimes very similar. And so, I've got friends from all different losses, and I think, how do you connect with that person? I just go, it's grief, honey. We all connect on this weird trauma bonding level, but it works. And so that was 2019 and then into 2020. And as we know, in the March of 2020, we hit a global pandemic and we were all forced online. And I at my time, my current work, I was on furlough, so I didn't have to work for 6 months and still got paid. Best 6 months of my life. And I thought, okay, I can dedicate to this podcast. Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty good time. And I dedicated to this page and this podcast, and I just wrote my heart away and podcasted just whatever came to me. There's nothing about the podcast, like as the years have gone by, of kind of, there's always strategy to things of what you want to talk about. But the crux of it really is just me like sitting in my bedroom talking about grief and just what's going on, and just having that really conversational, my biggest goal for the podcast, if anybody listens, it feels like you're just sitting and talking with a friend and you're putting all the world's wrongs to rights. And a problem shared is a problem halved in my eyes. And it's where it's got me to today. What started out as a very just like something for me to help me, and still does help me, ended up helping and still does quite a lot of people, and it's the biggest blessing and achievement of my life today. And I've been blessed and so fortunate to have different opportunities come into my life, whether it was TV, radio, or just even job opportunities, to be able to like globally, talk about my mum and talk about one of the most amazing people who ever graced my life and brought me into this world, to have the chance to do that time and time again, whilst also helping people as well. Just like, it's wild.
What a cool way to carry on her legacy. You know, that's incredible. And it speaks to me a lot. What motivated you to start the podcast? That's what motivated us to start Decidedly. Is, you know, we don't have any sort of grand ambition. Hopefully we can get better. And if we can get better, then that was worth it. And I tell people a lot who are kind of thinking about having a podcast, or maybe they're going to start one. I said, if nobody ever listened to this, I'd still keep doing it.
Yeah.
I get to learn from people like you who had to make important decisions. They get to talk through decisions that I'm making. And I'm imagine that is what your experience is like. You know,
totally.
Geez, just talking about it is therapeutic. What did you notice was the biggest change in how you processed grief between who you were before you started the podcast and who you are now 3 years into it?
Oh my gosh, worlds apart. Even just from the time of when my mum died, and those 3 years between mum dying and me starting the podcast, there was a lot of anger in my life and within me. I couldn't express myself without it coming out in anger and just telling everybody to fuck off and to leave me alone and get out of my life, when actually deep inside,
what did that anger look like?
Oh, that anger looked like exactly that, telling people to fuck off to their face and to quite literally cutting them out of my life. And these were people who I had grown up with, who I was tighter than tight with, who loved me and who cared for me. But because I couldn't say, I am so deeply hurting inside, because I'm not actually really angry at you. I'm not really angry at this person or this really feeble situation. I'm really angry at my mum dying, and there's actually no answer to it.
Try to even love me. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like I didn't want people to go through what I was going through and lose, someone really important to them at all. But I wanted somebody to understand this deep pain that I was carrying with me every day when I was going to work, when I was going out with friends. I would still have all these really joyous experiences in my life, but there was just always this deep, heavy rucksack of grief. So from there to starting the podcast and meeting people and having these conversations, like, as you said, if nobody listened to the podcast, I really wouldn't mind, because I still get to have these really great conversations with people that I've handpicked. And I'm like, I want to know your story and I just want to talk to you. That's all I want to do. I want to talk to you. And from learning from people and how they cope and how they don't, and how their grief has shaped them, has given me the language and the tools to be able to express myself a lot better. And that's not to say that I don't feel anger much anymore, or at all anymore. It's still there, but I'm just a lot better at articulating it and not rage balling at everybody, so to say. So yeah, the podcast and just the community itself has vastly helped me to articulate my grief, for sure.
That's something interesting about what you did was you cast people away from your life and made them feel like you don't want to have anything to do with them. And a therapist told me once, the way that other people make us feel is the way that they're feeling, right? So when people are acting out and telling us to screw off and go away, or making us feel jealous or whatever, making us feel worthless, it's like, that's what they're feeling.
Projection.
And that's interesting, that's how you were feeling, whether it was, I don't want to put words to your own emotions, but
no, not at all.
No,
that is. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it was a total projection. As I don't know if you caught when I said it, just kind of the anger was, I wasn't angry at all these people, and I was really cutting off people left, right, and center for the most silliest of things, when actually I wasn't angry at them at all. I was just so upset and just so deeply angry at the universe, at the world, for taking my mum away when I was 19 years old and she was 51. It just felt like such an injustice, and that we had been done so dirty by the world. And it's only through the podcast that I've learned what that actually was, and actually naming it and being accountable to myself. Actually, I think for a long time I almost justified my actions to people and to myself as well. Yeah, you justify it, and you're like, X, Y, Z, okay.
If you don't justify it, you're horrible.
Like you're an evil person.
You always have to justify what you're doing. Yeah, you always have to justify.
And then I held my hands up, but I was like, oh no, even if I just okay, I'm justifying it, but I still was a bit of an arsehole at some times. And knowing that I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't ever want to go back to that place. And I've learned to forgive myself as well. Gosh, there's so many times I really said some really hurtful things to people in the name of grief and hurting, and actually holding your hands up and going, you know what, I really messed up there. And although I am deeply hurting, and still was and still am sometimes, it's not justifiable to treat another human being like that in the sake of grief. You can be grieving, but you don't have to be an arsehole.
Yeah. See? I've been telling you.
As we've had discussions about that before, is that if you don't have an outlet for those emotions, they'll come out anyway, and they'll come out sideways. If you're not deciding how you're going to process that and have a mechanism and people who can help you process that, it's going to come out one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally.
What advice do you have for people who are going through grief as it relates to decision making? I would think that dealing with grief is going to be one of those really particularly difficult times to make decisions while you're processing that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think with grief, there's just, you have decisions from like the get-go, from when that person dies, and when you are not in the right frame of mind, potentially, to be holding those decisions. But these decisions need answers, and it does not call for indecisiveness at all. So whether that's, does this person want to be buried or cremated? And you think, oh God, well, we've never actually even had that conversation of what they wanted at the end of their life. Or when am I going to go back to work? You have to go back to work, but when? Because if you don't go back to work, you won't put food on the table and lose the roof over your head. So then what? You're grieving and you're homeless. Life still has to move forward. And I think that's one of the most difficult parts in grief, is that your world is collapsing, not just collapsed, it is still collapsing around you as you navigate through this world, and you still have to make decisions. But I think one of the biggest decisions, especially in context of today, of kind of, probably one of the biggest decisions I maybe had to make was, especially with the podcast and starting it, was I could either have acknowledge that summer of 2019, when my mental health and my grief really took me for a ride, and kind of I could have laid back and let it go. Do you know what? Take me. This is me now. I'm just going to live in this despair and this depression and just this hole of grief. Or I can find a way to honor my mum, because like I said, she's one of my favorite people to talk about. And I can continue her legacy and just continue honoring her and remembering her in a way. And I don't have to stay stuck. You can feel so stuck, and kind of, I don't have to. I've seen it happen with people in my family and other people. It's a very slippy slope in grief. You can either go and turn this devastating thing that's happened in your life and make a beautiful life out of yours. And most people, you go through a loss and you think, you know what, tomorrow's not promised. Let me go for that job opportunity. Let me go on that holiday. Let me eat that bloody slice of cake. And some people live, take life by the balls. And some people go the other way, and they get eaten up by the bitterness of the injustice of what has happened to them. And this is not me saying to them, sack that off and grab life by the balls, because I know how easy it is to slip into that of going, well, actually, I'm not looking at it as I don't want to sit here and say looking at it as a glass half full, because there's nothing glass half full about someone dying in your life, but looking at it and going, I don't want to live like this forever. I don't want to live with this grief being this really horrible thing in my life. There's more to this grief than just mourning and despair. There is laughter, there is joy, there is dark humor, there are revelations in grief. Like, my grief has shaped my relationships with people and the way I navigate through my career tremendously. It's given me a little bit of a glass half full kind of aspect, because you don't know when the glass is going to tip over unless you've done. What's the worst that can happen? I kind of think of life now. What is the worst that can happen when the worst has already happened to you in a way? And whether that's toxic or good, I don't know. But I think there is a real big decision of, do I stay stuck in this despair, or do I try to move forward? Not on, because you'll never move on, and there's a very big distinction between moving forward and on from grief. But how do I learn to move forward?
Describe that difference.
So the difference between moving on and moving forward, to me, is when we're very much told of, I see it all the time in news and media, whenever there's, a public death or whatever it means, moving on. And I think it stems so far back into just how societally we have treated death and dying. Of, it is something you experience, and then after maybe a year or two, if they're gracious, they'll say, okay, time to move on now. Time to stop crying yourself to sleep now. Time to stop talking about them, for one. Time to stop getting all their photos out at Christmas and Thanksgiving and honouring them. They think it's too much now. You should have packed this all up now. And for some people, it varies. Some will give the grace of a year, some will be like 6 months. And actually, even in science and academia, in the last year, there's been this new diagnosis that came out in the DSM-5, which I believe is in the States. So the DSM-5, it's like the Bible of all diagnoses. And it's prolonged grief disorder. And it caused an absolute upheaval in the online community because we very much feel like this pathologizing grief, of like putting an expiration date on grief. And the key factors in this diagnosis was, okay, between 6 months and 1 year, you should have stopped doing all of this. And it has pros and cons, but it again feeds into after this, you should be moving on. But actually, when we change the narrative and we look of, well, actually, even just in the terms of terminology of saying moving forward with it, because when we say that, it's allowing and giving people permission to say, it's okay that you're going to live with this thing for the rest of your life, and actually acknowledging you will live with this for the rest of your life, but it doesn't have to be this painful thing. It's not only okay,
it's inevitable.
Exactly. It's inevitable of kind of, of just saying like, so that's kind of what I try to do on the podcast, of give those kind of hard truths to people, because nobody gave me those hard truths. I so wish somebody had said to me, Amber, babe, you're going to live with this for the rest of your life, right? And I would go, what do you mean? So in the next year, like I'm not going to, and they'd be like, no. But I would have loved for somebody to have said, no, you will still carry this with the rest of your life, but it won't be exactly like how it is right now. When you say to somebody who's grieving, you have this for the rest of your life, it is a never-ending project. That can feel really daunting and overwhelming, of like, what do you mean? Because to them, grief is this really big, ugly monster that, weighs them to the bed. They can't get through the day without hysterically crying. They can't talk about their person at all. So for them, they think, I can't deal with that for the rest of my life. But actually, when people meet other people and connect and see that, oh no, grief actually has so many different layers, and actually some quite good layers to it as well, in terms of the joyous moments as well. Grief and joy can exist together. But yeah, that's for me, the kind of difference of moving on and moving forward, is that moving on, I feel like, puts a bookend on it and says, right, enough now, pack it up, got to go. Whereas moving forward, it's changing the perspective on it and saying, we'll move forward with this, and you'll have a relationship with your grief. People find that weird, and they're like, a relationship with your grief? You're like, yeah, because it's a relationship with your person. Just because your person has died doesn't mean that your relationship dies as well. Like, I feel like I conversate with my mum all the time, and I now understand things years down the line and decisions that she made as a woman and as a mother that I understand more now than I do at 19 years old, because our relationship and our bond still continues.
Yeah. I really like how you framed the difference between moving on and moving forward, because I think there's steps in the grieving process. One of the things that I deal with when I work with people who have had a loved one who've passed along, and as a financial advisor, it's part of the process of dealing with somebody's finances in their life. Yeah. And one of the things I always tell them is let's don't make any irrevocable decisions right now. And so one of the things as it relates to decision making during grief is I always tell them, let's don't make any decisions. And it seems like there are many times where people want to make a decision. And maybe that's part of the grief process. Maybe that's part of how people process the grief they're going through, is they will call me and say, all right, we need to make all these changes. We need to close this account. We need to change this ownership. We need to change the beneficiaries. And it just seems like there's this anxiety around making changes and making decisions that they don't have to make.
It feels, when that happens, it feels like that's an effort to move on. And sometimes that happens like really early on in that stage for what I see also. People I'm usually one of the first people that gets notified when someone passes. I'm up there on the list. Yeah. Outside of immediate family. Sometimes people cry, sometimes not, but they never are emotional in the way that they would be if they were just calling their friend, right?
Yeah.
It's like a very professional, no matter how deep our relationship is, people, when they cry in front of me, they will apologize. They will try to not cry. Oh, I said I wasn't going to cry. It's okay. Like mom died last Thursday. It's okay, you know?
Yeah.
But it feels like when they're making those decisions, okay, so let's get to work, right? Because once we're done with this, then I won't feel this way anymore.
Yeah.
You think they want to get things done because there's a finality to it?
Yeah, it totally makes sense to me because, okay, let's just hurry up, you know?
Do you find there are decisions that people must make during the grief process?
Yeah, so even to touch on of kind of what you were just saying there about, getting your ducks in a row after somebody has died I can very much relate to that of when our mum died, my brother very much took on that role of, okay, what do we need to do logistically? What accounts do we need to close? What accounts do we need to clear? And it was very A, B, C, this needs to be done. And for some people, for them to survive, what they need to do is just be doing something. So, for example, my brother, after all those kind of tasks are done, for some people, it's much more quick. I'm sure, as you know, there can be really long probate and things like that, estate, and it can go on for a long period of time. And sometimes these tasks are done very quickly. And in the case of my brother, once all those tasks were done, he decided, okay, I'm going to completely renovate the house. So he was like busy for the next year away. So he was very much busy. But then that comes to an end. And it is just, to me, from what I see, is it's a, you kind of said of it, them wanting to put a finality on it and put almost like the final nail in the coffin. For some people, it's just giving them something to do, to give an element of control back into their life and just get things done and to keep themselves busy. But eventually, as we referred back to a while ago, of it will find its way out sideways, whatever way it wants to come out of. But there are many decisions that grieving people have to make of kind of, and there's no guide on it as well. I think in context of people who have a partner who dies and there are children in the mix of that, of how do you tell this child that their parent has died without traumatizing them, but also being very honest with them that their parent is not coming back? And you as a parent in that moment, am I going to protect my child, or am I, but then also, is that actually protection? And it's kind of, you don't have time to, it's almost like you think you're protecting the child. Again, I'm just talking like through conversations with many of my friends who have lost partners, but in the moment it feels like they're protecting, obviously by not maybe divulging or using terminology that is quite final of dad has died, mum has died, and it means they're not coming back, or using language of mummy's gone to heaven or mummy is now sleeping. And although you may think that's a very soft way to go and approach it, sometimes it can be a bit more damaging and it can leave it very open for, like, say, the child. And even kind of general, even with us as adults, I feel like we really struggle sometimes with even just saying the word died. We often do go to passed away. I still do as well. I'll be like, oh, they passed away.
Part of being a financial advisor, we talk about estate planning. We talk about final planning and expenses and things like that. It's just part of what you have to discuss.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
I have noticed that people never say when I die. They say if I die. If I die. Yeah. People always say, so if I die, blah, 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 blah. They never say when I die.
No, you're going to die, dude.
This is a part. If I die, you're like, if there is two, very concrete things in life, death and taxes, you will be taxed and you will die. Those are two very things in life.
There's such a reluctance to face it. I think there's just such a reluctance to deal with it. And it may be part of the whole taboo topic of grief is that people don't even want to acknowledge that it's going to happen.
Of course, because it's so painful.
Have you seen that? Is that there's this difficulty?
Oh God, yeah. You'd think, right, that me doing the work that I do, and like with my friends that I have, and like my closest, nearest, and dearest, knowing the work that I do, that everybody around me is like grief and death literate, and we all have like planned our funerals and what we're gonna do when we die, blah blah blah. No, like my dad still. I say to him, right, Dad, come on, Mum died. I think it's about time you got your ducks in a row. And he's like, no, not talking about it, like that is so morbid. And it's so interesting that you still think, even when you've been touched by grief and death.
So he doesn't even want to talk about it anymore.
No, he's just not talk about mum, but talk about the thought of him dying and him leaving us.
Okay, yeah.
So for him to get his ducks in a row and sort his estate and his finances, it's just a place he doesn't want to go. And I totally get why people don't, because especially, if you've got dependencies, or just, it's a really dark place to go to, of thinking, oh God, yeah, what will happen after I die, and to all the people? Obviously they'll be heartbroken too, but I think it is possibly one of the most noble things a person can do, just to get a few things in check. Because I read something, it's like your will, like it's not a gift for you, it's a gift for people left behind after you. It is,
for sure.
My and just have
died
that
without a will. And
oh gosh,
when he died, there was absolutely nothing that was in order. There was absolutely nothing that was in order. And it made it particularly challenging because he had children from 2 different marriages. And so when you die without a will in Texas, that gets handled differently than if you didn't have children from different marriages.
Certainly different than how people thought it would be handled, or expected it to be.
What happens in that case when you die in Texas without a will is your children from your first marriage inherit 50% of everything, and your widow inherits 50% of everything else. Your children from that widow don't get anything. That's not what most people want. It's certainly not what even my mom wanted. She inherited half of something that she felt like shouldn't even belong to her. And so it became a big problem for the family. And it was frustrating too, because my grandfather had cancer for like 15 years. And he was not young. He was like, man,
and you're in your
70s, you've been sick. You could have done this. You really could have done this. And
it made the grieving process more difficult too.
It made the grieving process more difficult because, now you're worried about,
you got to deal with this stuff.
Is grandpa's widow going to keep the house? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. There's just all these big question marks. Stuff? Yeah, all these big question marks over everything. And as you said, for your mum, like, she's now got this money and all this stuff of kind of, she didn't ask for all of this, and kind of now, and nothing like a bit of money to ruin a family sometimes in a real time of need. It's horrifying. I'm sure, as you guys know, the horror stories that you hear of families fighting over money and estate, and you almost curse the person who died. Always. You think, for God's sake, why did you not just even scrap it on a bit of paper somewhere? I don't know, and just get it down.
I would say it's the rare exception that people don't fight. It's not always like a relationship ruining fight. It's not always I'm never going to talk to you again type fight.
It gets tense though.
But there's never, I've never seen, but maybe like a couple times, complete cooperation and, completely all rosy. It's all fine.
That was when it was an only child.
Yeah.
I'm sure that when
an orphaned only child.
Dies,
right.
When someone dies without having done that work, the problem that it creates for the people who are recipients of not just the money, but those people that are close, is that they've got to not only make decisions about accounts and this and that, but they're not able to be guided by the legacy and the intangible outcomes that this deceased person wanted to have happen.
Yeah.
Right. So then all of the tense fighting becomes about things that are tools to build, create, or further a legacy, but you're doing that without the guiding star of what is that legacy in the first place. So then the question, well, this is what mom would have wanted, right? Because some of these decisions are very easy. Change that account from her name to my name. That's easy, right? It can't stay in her name. But not even just how do you divide it? Like, what do you go do with the investment? What do you spend this money on that mom gave? What do you do with the house? Do you go move in with your kids into the house, or do you sell the house? What do? Do you give the house to charity that mom always volunteered?
Yeah, you've essentially dropped these people in the middle of the woods with no map.
Yeah, and so people, like, the gift that we have while we're alive is to not only write the will, right, and say this account's going to go here, but write out the legacy plan. What do I really want people to think of me? What do I want people to remember as important to me? And that way, then the recipients of our wealth and the people who have to create that legacy for us and carry it on aren't doing it without a guide at all. Because what you've done is you've created a legacy for your mom, and it's a
she might not even like it, for all I know. She might not even like it. You know,
she might hate it.
she might think it's arrogant and pompous and thinks, "Shut the hell up, Amber! Stop talking about me." But I'm just
telling everyone about my business.
Yeah, she's like, God, do you mind? Like, I'm just lost in the dark. Exactly. And as you were talking there, it really made me think about, there's a gentleman called Rabbi Steve Leader, and I don't know if you've heard of him, but he'd be great on here to talk to you about this whole stuff. His whole thing is about ethical wills. And he's like, yeah, okay, you can do your will and do your estate and do your money, but what is your ethical will? What do you want to leave to guide your loved ones behind of your legacy and your honor? How do you want your send-off to be? How do you want your funeral to be? What life lessons do you want to actually leave your people behind? Because after a while, things like houses and money and estate, yeah, okay, great. You can live in mum's lovely family home house, or, you know, you've got a big old payout and you can go on that big old family holiday, but there's still nothing left from them for you to actually hold on to for the rest of your life. Something written down, a life lesson, even if it's something like crazy, like a recipe. I know people who hold on to those recipes like their life depends on it, and they would swap that money out for that recipe any day, because that is their closest bond. The assets don't matter sometimes at the end of the day. It's these things.
No, they totally don't.
Yeah. I mean, if you were homeless,
where somebody, there was a woman like that who would like never share her recipe with anybody. Mm-hmm. You know, like, well, you know, over my dead body, blah blah blah. You're not getting this recipe. You know, and so the family chiseled it onto the back of the tombstone.
No,
literally over the dead body, and just you know, for grandma's brownie recipe or whatever it was. But I think there's a grief process that happens, it seems to me, with any loss of relationship. The person doesn't have to die. It could be a significant breakup of a romantic relationship, or with somebody who retires. I noticed that there is, it's certainly not as significant as when somebody passes away, but it seems like people go through, if they got fired from a job, they go through a grief process, or if they separate from somebody, they go, or divorce, they go through a grief process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've done. And when you said there, kind of like, it's not as significant as like the death of a person. Like, I think it's all relative, isn't it? To me, yes. Like I remember I was made redundant from my job in 2020 during the pandemic. I used to work for an airline, and it was just all chaos, and I was made redundant. And I remember the feeling of grief that came back to me, like that fresh, raw grief. And I went, oh shit, I'm grieving for this job because I really liked it and I really enjoyed it, and I now don't have it anymore and I can't get it back. And that really flipped the script for me, because I was so very much tunnel vision of grief is just tied to death and death of a person, and actually realizing that is so small-minded, and that grief is not solely tied to death. The grief that people go through when they lose a relationship, of grieving for somebody, grieving for somebody that is still alive. Grieving for somebody that is still alive, who you no longer have a relationship with, but you spent a very maybe long time with each other, or we just really, a lot of your core memories, or even how you've shaped as a person is through that person, but you now no longer speak. That is agony, pure agony. Like your strangers, lovers who are now strangers, or best friends for 20 years who are now strangers. That is agony. And I've lived both the death and the living agony, and I'm like, it feels very much the same. It feels very much the same. But unfortunately, societally, we don't give as much grace for people who do go through experiences of grief, like a loss of a friendship, a relationship, a job, a way of life. I think the pandemic and us all being, locked down, a lot of us grieved for our everyday life of being able to go to our office, our job, go out for our morning coffee. Like it sounds really weird when you say like I'm grieving for my morning coffee, but it's deeper than that. You're grieving for your rituals, for your freedom. Like, I feel like we were grieving for our freedom. I was climbing up the walls and I was like, I just want to get out of here. I was like just missing the sunshine and getting out and about. And so I don't think it's a different process for people. I just think it needs to be acknowledged for people, and that's what I'm really hoping to try and do in my podcast. I'm really trying to, for the future of the show, is to be sharing stories and meeting people where they've experienced grief and loss, not just through death. And I think it's through that of us actually holding our hands up and saying, yeah, no, I did break up with my boyfriend and it really hurt and I am still grieving for it. Only then will it become an acceptance for people to go, yeah, I'm grieving, and it's not just tied to death, and I'm not going to feel silly for saying that either.
Yeah, I really, really love what you're doing. I think that it requires conscious decision making to get the most out of the life that we're living, and particularly in and during stages of grief. We have in this culture, the Western culture that, our countries share, I think we have an encouragement of a victim mentality, generally speaking. We tell people a lot of things that have gone wrong in your life are things that happened to you, right? And you're a victim and you couldn't have changed it and you can't overcome it and it'll never leave you.
Yeah.
And we allow people to wallow in their own self-pity and say, no, it's okay. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to have anxiety. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay to eat that tub of ice cream on a Friday night, and ignore your phone and not talk to anyone that you love. It's okay. Well, grief is one of those things that really does happen to you, right? And it is one of those things that you can never wash away. You will always be someone who lost her mother. That's the reality, and it will never not hurt. And I don't think that the choices are between, moving on from it, forgetting it, or wallowing in self-pity. Those aren't the only two choices. And you've found that we can continue to get the most out of life while still carrying the burden that will never go away. And I think that if we applied that mindset to other areas where we might want to be encouraged by society to adopt a victim mentality, we'd be better off for it. So, you know what? This anxiety that I have, it actually might never go away. It won't always feel like it does right now when it's 3:00 and I'm staring at my wall and can't sleep and my stomach's churning. It won't always feel like it does right this moment, but it will always be with me. Maybe this depression is not ever going to truly, truly go away. It might just sit on my shoulder and be a little bit quieter than it was in the past. And I think that that's grief too. It's never going to go away. It'll always be with you.
Yeah.
But you don't have to let it win either.
Exactly. Words out of my mouth there. You don't have to let it win every time. And it's acceptance. I think that's the biggest decision you will ever probably have to make in grief is accepting that this thing is with you for life, accepting that, yes, your person has gone and is never coming back. The state of delusion in grief is real, and you can be in that. You can go in and out of it. I feel like I do sometimes of like, God, is she really actually dead? But at my core, I have accepted that she has died, and I know viscerally that she has died. And accepting that victimhood is so interesting. I find it, and I feel like there's times where we can very much fall into victimhood in grief and wallowing, and misery loves company, and that's why sometimes people flock to one another and just in this state of misery, and it's so very easy to do. But then it's kind of not wanting to live by a victim, of actually going, okay, I'm surviving grief. It feels like you are in a battle every day sometimes with yourself and your mind and your mental well-being, and actually going, who am I going to let win today? And sometimes it's completely out of your control, even with all your might. If you're like, I'm not letting this thing beat me today, but you know what? You tried, you gave it your best. And that's not to say that you know, by you giving your best, it's like suppressing your grief or like pocketing it away or not letting emotions come to the surface. Not at all, but not letting it stop you from doing the things that you want to do every single day, being the person that you want to be every single day, shaping the life that you want. Because I just always think when you befriend your grief, and people who think you are mad when you say that, like befriending your grief, like, because they think it's just this nasty thing. When you befriend it, it becomes a lot less aggressive. And I almost think sometimes for some people, I know for me, it was quite a lot easier to actually almost visualize my grief as like this external thing, like a friend, like a beast, because I would almost talk to it and kind of be like, you're really pissing me off today.
Yeah.
And you're really getting on my last nerve. So what are we going to do to stop doing that? And you know, it's all within, you know, right, okay, if my grief is really irking me, what I can tell 9 times out of 10, right, when I know a bad kind of grief moment is going to be coming up in the change of season. If I'm approaching like my mum's death anniversary, Christmas time, I can now acknowledge when these feelings are seeping in, and kind of before, when I ignore it, then it would just become louder and bigger and bigger and bigger until it demanded to be seen. And now I'll just be like, yeah, come hang. Yeah, I know we're going to feel like shit for a couple of weeks. So yeah, maybe let's eat the ice cream for a little bit, but we're going to do it for a bit. But then what we're going to do, we're going to get up on our feet and we're going to go, because we've had our moment. Yeah. We've fell apart and we've come back together again. I feel like as time goes by, you know, there's the age old, you know, time is a healer in grief. I don't think it is. You just learn to walk alongside it, and you learn to befriend it, and you learn to know it's your strengths and your weaknesses with your grief, and you befriend it. It doesn't, you know, you grow around the grief, and it just stays in that little pocket size in your pocket for the rest of your life. And the sooner you acknowledge it, it will be a lot easier to say.
I love that idea of anthropomorphizing the grief, right? I remember talking with someone about their anxiety. I said, hey, I got this too. I got the same problem. You got to know that you have a little pet demon that just lives with you, and it's always going to be there. But you can decide like how vicious is this demon, right? Yeah. And if you had a bear as a pet, right? If you had never seen a bear before, you'd think it's a demon. So if you had a bear that you have to live with, well, what would you do? You know, would you make it go hunt for its own food? Or would you, I'm feeding that thing berries and getting it fat and laden and I'm going to make this, I'm going to tame this beast, right? You can tame the beast.
Yeah.
So totally. We have tamed beasts throughout our history as mankind. You can tame the beast of anxiety. So I imagine my own as like, you know, this ugly little beast, but it's kind of a cute little cartoon.
Yeah.
You know, okay, well, I'm gonna feed it a little bit, because it's not, if it gets hungry, you know, it might hurt me.
Yeah, exactly. You almost have to give it a bit of TLC, because you think, don't turn on me, like don't turn on me. So like, what do you need? What do you want from me? I'm a good guy. I'm a good guy.
We're also not hanging out. We're not hanging out all day long either, you know. You can stay here for a bit. You can't play fetch with your dog all day.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to know, like, right.
A little bit, I'm going to give you a little bit, and then I'm leaving.
You have to acknowledge it, and you do. You got to give a little bit, and then you got to go, right, enough now. Okay, I need to get on with my day. I need to get on. I need to live.
I think there's a lot of wisdom of that, of sort of putting it and saying, well, this is not me acting this way. This is the grief coming through me. This is the grief expressing itself. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Amber. I learned a lot. I'm not in the grief gang, thankfully. I don't want to get initiated anytime soon either.
No, neither.
But I do feel like we connected a lot.
Absolutely. It's been really wonderful to talk today.
Where can people find the work that you do?
You can find me predominantly on Instagram at the Grief Gang Podcast. I'm on also other platforms, Twitter, Facebook, just the Grief Gang Podcast. And you can listen to the show on all major podcast platforms such as Apple, Spotify, Google, Acast by searching the Grief Gang, all in one name, the gang you never asked to be a part of.
Yeah. Thank you, Amber, for sharing with us.
Thank you.
My first takeaway from our discussion with Amber is a realization that she probably thinks we're the ones with an accent. You know, she probably thinks, you know, from her perspective. But my takeaway was really around deciding to make an acceptance of the grief that is part of the process. And she made the comment, befriending your grief, bringing that into the process and allowing that to not cause you to overwhelm yourself with negative self-evaluation.
My takeaway was what we talked about right at the end, anthropomorphizing your grief, or insert any other mental struggle, right? Right. Those struggles don't define us any more than grief defines us. Depression, anxiety, they don't define us. Anthropomorphizing them, kind of creating this little cartoon beast that you're fighting, can help separate that struggle from who we are as humans, and can help us kind of compartmentalize it. Say, you know what, that lives over there. I want to keep that grief away from me. I want to keep that anxiety away from me, but also recognizes that it can never go away. So I think it's really healthy. It was something that I was already doing, but not in the way that I think I will moving forward after hearing that Amber also does it. You know, so I'm a little less crazy.
Just to add one thing, the thing she mentioned about making the distinction between moving forward versus moving on, and making that decision to make that distinction, I thought was really powerful.
I thought that was very, very important.
Anyway, I added an extra one. There you go. There's a bonus.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision and leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your support. It helps others find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more daily decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com and on Facebook and Instagram at Decidedly Podcast. Thanks again for listening. I'm Sanger Smith, and this is Decidedly.
Insights, advice, and comments provided by Sean Smith, Sanger Smith, and speakers identified as part of the Decidedly Podcast should not be considered recommendations. Speakers not identified as members of Decidedly are expressing their opinion, and their statements should not be construed as reflecting the views of the Decidedly team. This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes, not personalized advice.